Well, we're going to give it another try. Yeah, we're going to give it another go. See if I can get away with it this time. I guess I was showing a little too much of the Beatles coverage. So bear with me while I see if I can recover Tom and get us all back into this. And this time we'll do it without screwing up someone's copyright stuff. So okay, I can get my mouse to work now. Right. There we go. Okay, just closing the close off any possibility of video leakage. And I got to get this link to Tom. So Tom, if you're out there, just hang on a second and I'll be with you. Round 2. Get back again, invite a guest, copy the clipboard. Doing this live, so getting Tom back in live if I can. Tom, buddy, if you're listening to this, I have sent another link out. My apologies for all the confusion. Yes, I do have that overlay, and I didn't put it up there. That's my own stupid fault. Sorry about that, folks. And we were just, we're just getting into it as well. Let me see if I can pull something up that won't get us banned. Perhaps the odd article or two with some photos. Entire screen. Let me just close that down. Window. All right. Now, Tom. Oh, you're back, Tom. Good man. Hello, sir. Sorry about that.
No, it's all right. Don't need to apologize to me.
Somebody mentioned that I should put an overlay on it as opposed to an underlay. Sorry, that was a terrible joke. Right. We'll try that. See what happens. I'm not going to put the video. I'll keep the video off.
I wouldn't do any video at all. Yeah, it's just generally not.
Yeah, and I thought with the music, without the music playing, I might get away with it because it's just the publicly available trailers that I welded together.
Oh no! Well, normally I would say like whatever, but like because Disney isn't that big of a deal.
Disney.
They will usually drop a claim, but like I've never really played them live like that, and like over continuously. But like normally I would say video with videos like you don't want to usually use more than like 8 seconds, 8 to 10 seconds.
Okay.
And then trailers are generally not a good thing to use because they're all watermarked.
Yeah.
Understood. I was told from somebody from Warner that because basically you got all those channels that just turn around and re-upload trailers.
I know, and I wasn't trying to do that, which is a shame, but yeah, oh well.
Yeah, intentions aside, yeah.
Never mind, mate. Well, we were well into it. This is great. I really, again, appreciate you joining me. You get this stuff, and you've got all the history too of the band, which is fantastic. But I was pleased, just to go back to the beginning, that Peter Jackson was the guy that did this. Out of anybody it could have been, I think he was the right guy. First of all, he had the patience to go through the material, which was a hell of a job. But then he did that degraining and upscaling that made it look so good in the end, you know.
That's one thing I will disagree with. Like, I don't like the degraining. Because to me, especially at least on the 16 millimeter footage, the 35 millimeter footage didn't look bad, but the 16 millimeter footage, it made everything look rubbery. I don't mind a little grain, and I know that 16 millimeter can look pretty good in 4K because I've seen a few movies now between Texas Chainsaw and Evil Dead look great. So I think he would have been well enough not to crank it up so much, at least. But outside of that, no, like other than that, like the achievement of him going through what he did find, getting what he did use, using footage when he had to cover audio that didn't have footage, can't take any of that away from him. But that's my only minor gripe. It was because he did do a little bit of that scrubbing shit, which was kind of a problem with Lord of the Rings too. We had to deal with had a lot of conversations about that with the 4K crowd. But
so you know much more about this technical stuff than me.
Unfortunately, the downfall of this, for those who don't like grain, which is kind of like, oh, sorry, but that's what film is. Once you take away the grain, that takes away detail. So to me, it made everything look a little fuzzy and soft and rubbery.
It did give it an ethereal quality. I think.
Was kind of a little off,
which was very unreal. Yeah.
But once you got to the roof session, that's when they start using 35 millimeter footage. That stuff looks stupendous. Even though I think they applied the same kind of stuff to it, but since there's much more resolution to work with when it comes to 35 millimeter as opposed to 16 millimeter, it showed in that difference. But overall, I mean, just the fact that we have this and the quality, and some of this stuff was, I mean, most of this stuff is shit we've never seen before. So that's in and of itself is amazing.
Indeed, I'd never seen the multiple takes of each of the songs on the roof. I mean, I think they did get back 3 times, didn't they, in the end? And
something like that, at least twice.
Yeah. So that was interesting to see that. And what I found, and we did talk a little bit about this earlier, is that the performance on the roof was extremely polished. And the
outside of the one they did flub up pretty good, which was "Don't Get Me Down" or whatever, I think.
Yeah, but when you take that from even 2 weeks before, when they didn't have any structure in some of these hardly. I think the day that they spent unfilmed in Apple in the studio, that one day that they said no cameras, I think they really knuckled down on that day and nailed a lot of stuff.
Perhaps that'd be my guess.
Like, just let's keep the cameras out here. Let's just sit down, the 4 of us, and just hammer these 6 songs that we know we can do, you know. And I think because when you saw this next day, which was 4 or 5 days before the Rooftop, they really were a lot further forward, I thought. So, yeah, I think that made a difference anyway.
And you could tell that they were getting very self-conscious with the cameras around after a while too.
Yeah, well,
but outside of outside of the video side of things, which I may have a few qualms with or whatever you want to call it, but that's it. The audio side of things, I mean, this is a huge leap for audio technology, because Peter had these guys create a program that I feel like is going to be very useful going forward with remastering movies, especially those that are stuck in mono, because that's what he had to do, is basically use a technology that would split up every sound so we could crank down some of the other stuff, especially going back to what I'd said in the other part now about the boys just jamming and making noise when they were trying to have a more private conversation. Peter was able to pull out all that noise now, and we actually get to hear these conversations, which is a big deal.
And there's some fascinating conversations, and one of the stuff we did get to hear was the audio that we'd never heard before, like the secret bug in the dining area. That was the hearing.
Which is probably the most candid we've got to hear the guys. Yeah,
John and Paul just talking like 2 guys, not knowing they were being recorded, and it's where you see that not just that conversation, but other ones where everyone goes on about George and Paul being at odds, but John was really quite dismissive of George sometimes. And this is back to the days when George was the 14-year-old guy that Paul had dragged along.
Well, yeah,
to join the Quarrymen, and he was like, "Well, fuck him, we'll just get Eric. He's better anyway."
Well, and it's like, you know, like the whole thing with because like in that little conversation, which is funny because we were talking about how Paul seemed to be like running the show, but then when you listen to that conversation, it kind of goes back to the whole like, John is the guy who really kind of is the controlling force, and he even kind of says, he's like, I'm just kind of following along with what you're doing, and I think it's kind of how he put it, but I can't remember exactly verbatim, but like, he's like, but I can't remember exact wording he uses, but it's very clear that when it comes to the final say on something, or if Paul doesn't quite know which direction to go, who he turns to, and who is really kind of Paul is all worried about the image and the flash of the Beatles, but he knew that John was truly the backbone, I guess.
Yeah.
I can't really quite think of the word, because I wouldn't say quite the heart, but he's definitely
well, it was his band.
Exactly. Yes.
He was the original guy, and way back to Johnny and the Moondogs and all these other names they had, the Quarrymen. He was the last man standing, and it was him that they all circled around to get into this band.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah,
and I mean, he kind of wears those shoes, or however you want to put it, in that little conversation. But outside of that, you see playful John most of the time.
A lot of the time. And that was another great thing about this, is that, while Let It Be as a movie concentrated a lot on the downer aspect of it, you saw an awful lot of fun in this. Laughing, joking, play acting, hugging.
John's bits are hilarious.
Yeah, he's giving it this.
Well, not just that. It's like every time they would start doing something, and he'd say, "And tonight's entertainment, folks, the Rolling Stones," or whoever it would be. He'd come up with another one every time.
Oh, he said that about 18 times because it was he was asked to do it for the Rock and Roll Circus, and he just kept doing it and doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Sweet Loretta Fat, she thought she was a cleaner, but she was a frying pan.
Yeah. Everybody got a hard on.
That's right. He had all those one-liners. It was in, thank you we passed the audition.
We passed the audition, yes. Which is something I think he said all the time, yes, too. Yeah.
He did, but he did have a fantastic sense of humor.
Well, John did. He was always kind of the sly wit,
yeah,
and I loved them even giving him shit like that. That was the beauty of it all, is seeing each and every one of them kind of all give him shit. Yeah, about stuff, and John got his shit about being in that movie, How I Won the War.
Yeah,
and they were quiet.
Good at weed.
Yeah,
they're killing's me business, or liberating's me business. Saw it. I've only seen that film once, but that was the line that sticks in my head.
I've never seen the film in its entirety, but I do finally own it. It's not been one of those movies that's easy to find.
Oh, no.
But Kino Lorber just released it recently on Blu-ray, so I finally have it in my possession. I just haven't got a chance to watch it yet.
Direction. Yeah, good for you, mate. Yeah. But yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. But yeah, he's a funny guy. He had a lot of humor in him, and I don't think the Beatles would have lasted if they didn't have that humor. They were tight. These guys were tight as hell. They'd practically been living together for 10 years, and they got each other. And they might have, as they always said, no matter how much they argued, they always united against the outside, which was their strength, So when someone would try and come in and push them around, I'm not saying that was always a good thing. Sometimes it worked against them, but
no. But George always made that point too. The beauty of the Beatles was, I think it was George who said this, that Elvis was by himself, right? He didn't have anybody that he could turn to and know what it felt like. Unlike the Beatles, there was the four guys. They had each other, right? Like they knew the pressure each was under, and even though George got probably and it got to him. He even said, why don't you just get out Clapton, because I might not come in tomorrow, and he didn't come in tomorrow. It clearly showed, and really this gave me was kind of an appreciation for George. I mean, if you watch it from the one angle of Let It Be and stuff like that, it kind of makes him look one way, but you do see the contributions he made to the band, and like you're right, like how John just kind of was very dismissive of him in a lot of ways.
Sometimes, he still saw him as that kid that was like 4 years younger,
and that's understandable because right, you as you pointed out, these guys were only still 6-7 years deep into this.
John was like 28 or something.
But that's the point. Yeah, they were still kids. They were still technically kids, and they still had that hierarchy in the group. And I'm sure just being on this ride, it had to be like a fucking magic carpet ride. Because as you pointed out in the beginning of the last thing, I mean, these guys were pumping out albums like crazy. Like nobody does this shit anymore. And not only were these guys pumping out albums, they were pumping out quality stuff.
Well, and it got better and better. Yeah,
Exactly. It wasn't like, they were just like throwing a couple of decent songs in with a bunch of, cover songs like a lot of the bands were at the time to just kind of fill out their contracts.
yeah.
Like, no, these guys were, and like you said, just watching how they came together and just under a month to pull this off, it was amazing.
Yeah, and I think getting
Or
back to
just over a month, whatever one it was.
yeah, they were getting back to being the unit that made them, which has been a rock and roll band, especially in the early days before the screaming. I mean, the 12-hour sets in Hamburg, these guys could play. They were just tight as fuck. And White Album had started that, getting back to the roots. There was no more spending days in the studio polishing things. It's let's be a real live band again. And you could see how good a band they could be when they were motivated, you know? It's the screaming just ruined all that. So it's yeah, and that's one of the things we maybe did miss out on is they couldn't really get back to the concert stage, and by that time George didn't really want to, or not with those guys anyway. So
no, but I agree with you when you brought it up. Like I can't remember the exact term you used as far as like rudimentary, what you said as far as the album is, and that's part of it though, and that's kind of why I love the whole. This whole thing is perfectly just Get Back covers it all, and just the fact that it was written the way it was, and we get to see it in real time. And I mean, how many times can we say that we got to see somebody actually do this? Right. I mean, I'm sure there's some footage out there of certain bands, but I have a few documentaries that, have the making of an album on it. It's really cool to watch, but not this extensive. So.
Indeed. And I think George did, whilst we all know they break up, George did touch on it. I don't know if you recall hearing this in the show, that he did say, why don't we just take a year off or a year or two off and do our own thing? And maybe then get back together and do something. He wasn't suggesting the band should break up, and he had the right idea. And bands might do that now.
That's kind of more of a common thing now than it.
It became a more common thing that people would take a while off, they'd go back together, make that album, and take time off again, do their own thing. Then it seemed to be all or nothing.
Well, see, and I understand from like their point of view historically, you're riding that wave of the Beatles. It's like, well, if you take that chance and we do some solo albums, and that signals to people that we're done and we're over with. And then if we go back to something, they may not have seen it as, this spectacular return of the Beatles. People, they would be afraid that people might see it as, you couldn't hack it on your own. You're going back. Like, and I can totally see that from the point of view historically, right? I mean, it's so easy for us with hindsight to go, well, it would have made sense for you guys. You guys went off, do your own thing for a couple of years or a year or two, and you come back with like Abbey Road. I mean, holy shit, that would have been just like bigger than it ever was when it happened, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But we have that luxury. They didn't. They're sitting there at the time going, well, we don't want to lose this, right? Like, would you? That's kind of what pushes them through this whole documentary too. Is like, we got to make this happen. It's the Beatles, we're the Beatles.
And I don't think at this point they did want to lose it. Not yet. I mean, they were still committed.
Even
to
in
doing
the worst of it,
stuff.
I still don't think they'd wanted to. John was really the one who brought an end to it all, as you pointed out before. And George I don't think, like you said, I don't think George really wanted to walk away from the Beatles so much as he just was sick of not being able to do his thing. And I think he was the only one who pointed out that any of his songs really didn't turn out the way they had planned. Like, I think he was complaining about one of his songs that they had messed with earlier on.
I think it might have been All Things Must Pass? I can't remember which one it was.
No, it was one they actually recorded, but he was choosing not to do All Things Must Pass because he didn't want the same thing happening to him. And I can agree with him and see in this really opened my eyes to a lot of that shit. Because before this, I used to be the guy who would joke around about, George was the right guy in the right place at the right time. No, in retrospect, I see a lot more in this, how much more he contributed.
He said it in the show. He says, I'm not a guy like Eric. I don't play that way. And he wasn't, but he had a great musical sensibility, and he knew how to construct a song and knew what sounded good in it. He wasn't a ferocious lead guitarist. He was more of a songwriter's guitarist.
Well, right. I mean, his crowning achievement is, while my guitar, or still my, what is it?
While my
Still
guitar gently weeps.
What's the actual title? I always get it wrong.
While my guitar gently
While
weeps.
my guitar gently weeps. I always second
It's
guess
still
myself.
weeping. It's still while my guitar
fucking
weeps.
weeping. Yes.
But yeah, he was a songwriter's guitarist, and you had to layer these little bits and pieces in. And then when he was more of a rockabilly and then acoustic guy.
Well, we probably got robbed of some of the best years of his writing because he got shook with that whole lawsuit deal. I mean,
I know, that was terrible. Yeah, just I mean, you could. What was it? One of the Ronette songs they claimed that he'd copied
My Sweet
or something.
Lord was He's So Fine.
He's So Fine, the Chiffons, or whatever. Yeah, and it's just such bullshit. I mean, you could take any song and say, "Well, it sounds a bit like that one." You know,
it's just how the song, and that's the dumb thing is, and especially in a courtroom, like there should be special like judges for this kind of shit who have some kind of musical background, because then judge would clearly know. Well, it's not in the same key, but if you know anything about keys, yeah, you can transpose shit, and everything's going to sound like something else eventually. Yeah. Like,
well, look at that Robin Thicke and Marvin Gaye thing. You know,
exactly.
I mean, it's yes, it does sound like Marvin Gaye, but did Marvin Gaye create rhythm? I don't know if he did.
But if you try sitting there listening to My Sweet Lord up against He's So Fine, do they even sound like the same song?
No, and the subject matter is entirely different. And
the melody of the chords is similar, but that's my point exactly. If you have a judge who understands how chords work and how keys work,
well, you must have.
Like most of these guys can jump up on a stage in a bar and a blues bar and know how to play along because it's in the key of G. Gotcha. Right. Because, there's only so many fucking chords that fit in that key.
I know, like there's only so many chords and so many keys, and you can only arrange them in so many ways.
Exactly. That's where it should be down more to melody and words and stuff to that nature than it is.
As one of my favorite British comedians, Eric Morecambe, once said, "This song has all the right notes; they're just in the wrong order."
Well, I don't know if that's the same guy, but there was another comedian who went and said it was a comedy duo where they actually said that the 4 chords that wrote every single pop song of the last.
Oh well, the Bare Naked Ladies had a great song about that. It's all been done. If I put my fingers here and if I sing "I love you, dear," you know, it's.
Yep, I love that song. Great song.
But yeah, the George, he really built up because he couldn't get a lot of his songs on these albums. He'd built up a huge back catalogue, and again when he was solo, it was an outpouring of stuff like a double and triple.
And All Things Must Pass is a just fucking brilliant album, right?
It's a beautiful album, yeah, and it's got a lot of great guys playing on it. Hell, it's even got Phil Collins on percussion somewhere in there.
I didn't even really know that, actually. To be honest with you, I knew some of the other collaborations.
On a reissue later, he says, "And my apologies to Phil Collins for leaving him off the original credits."
I'll have to look because I have that new 5-disc version or whatever. Yeah. I think Giles Martin also did that one or whatever too.
Yeah. A fun fact: Phil Collins was also in the audience in the concert scene in Hard Day's Night at the end.
That I knew.
Yeah. But I just wanted to say a quick shout out to everybody in the chat. Thank you for coming. Thank you for following us over.
Thank you for coming back.
Coming back, yeah. Thank you for following us over to this new stream when the first one got canned because Disney Plus don't like me. But the feeling is mutual. So thanks everybody. I see you all in there, and
well, and speaking of that,
such a boomer, I can't type and talk at the same time. So
thank you to you guys for coming back, but also thank you to Peter Jackson, because I don't think to go back to you giving him praise earlier, he insisted that they not fuck with this, and they would have loved to have bleeped and trimmed out a few things here.
Well, I think they were going to race swap John Lennon, and they were going to make Paul McCartney a gay dwarf or something
like that. Yeah, they figured since he's dead anyway, you might as well.
That's right. You can do what you like with him. It's like Anne Boleyn, But, well, John Lennon's dead. We can do what we want with him.
It's like Hamilton, the Beatles edition.
Oh, by the way, that's right. Speaking of George Harrison, though, have you seen the new video for My Sweet Lord? There's a reissue. I guess it's coming up for. It's probably part of the All Things Must Pass.
Must be, because I just got that
50 years
month or whatever.
Yeah, and so there's a new video. Go look at George Harris's YouTube channel. I can't show it here.
It wasn't last month; it was a month before. But
yeah, and it's got it's really good. I actually really applaud them for doing it. It's got Mark Hamill at the start in it. And it's kind of like an X-Men feel. It's got like an X-Men feel to it.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. It's got some good people in it. It's also got Patton Oswalt, but that's another that's another story. That's the only downer in it, but yeah, it's a great video, and it's got a really kind of a X-Men feel theme to it. And if you watch it, you'll see what I mean. It's nice. I'd go look at it. But
interesting.
Captain Cockney Spock has finally subscribed to me. I've been trying to avoid him doing that for years. Keep switching channels, but he's found me. But
I see you got the list of what's this here?
Yeah, so the list on the screen. I don't know how easy.
They sing?
Let me just expand it a little. It might be difficult to see. My apologies to everybody if it is. But, this shows you songs that they might not all be in the finished broadcast, but they were certainly on the tapes. And this is all the songs they either played or jammed throughout the entirety of the sessions. And it's just an incredible list of stuff. You've got covers like Baby Come Back, which is a great 60s hit. They're doing stuff of their own, and they're doing stuff that they've done in the past.
Baby Let's Play House was actually one of the first songs that Johnny and the Moondogs would play of Elvis.
That's right, yeah. And then they've got stuff that they'd ended up not recording, like Backseat of My Car, which ends up in Ram.
I remember they were working on all. She come in through the window. He was working on heavily during. Yeah,
so virtually all of Abbey Road was a lot of it, heard in it. Yeah, all the bits and pieces of that. So they'd almost written all of that before they finished the Get Back sessions.
Buttercup was a fun one. I remember when that came up.
Yeah. The Foundations, yeah. Wasn't that used in what movie did that really get? The Matt Dillon.
Unfortunately, movie? Yeah, Something About Mary.
Something About Mary, yeah.
Yeah, that was always one of my personal little what do you call it? Guilty pleasures, and then that movie had to make it.
That's right. Well, there's one of my favorite songs of the Beatles ever did, Besame Mucho. Besame Mucho. And at the end he goes, cha-cha boom.
Cha-cha boom. There's a great version of that on the anthology as well, yeah.
Well, that's the one I love, yeah. And it's got a great rocking chorus to it.
Yep, yeah. And
they're doing the Daydream, Lovin' Spoonful.
Yeah.
This is what I loved about it. The amount of material they could just sit down and jam. They were like sponges for music, and even in Get Back, they're talking about Fleetwood Mac, they're talking about Canned Heat, talking about Dylan and the band. You know, they talk about other people's music on. Did you see Fleetwood Mac on TV last night? And that was the old Peter Green Fleetwood Mac, of course.
Which is funny because, did they even mention Beach Boys at all during the entire thing? Because that's the big rivalry always. But
do not recall them mentioning them.
I don't think they did.
And yet, McCartney particularly was fairly close to Brian Wilson.
Yeah.
And George Harrison had spent a lot of time hanging out with him in California too. So, and they certainly respected each other, but I don't recall them being mentioned once or any of the songs being jammed, other than Chuck Berry stuff that the Beach Boys did as well.
Obviously, yeah. No, but I know that was always kind of like one of their friendly, let's be real. I know. What's his face in the chat was just talking about how he didn't really care for the Beatles, and that's understandable.
Wookiee supremacy,
and they're overrated. I can appreciate that perspective, but one thing you can't do is say is how influential they were, and how fortunate we were as fans of music to have the rivalry that the Beatles and the Beach Boys had, whether it was friendly or what have you, because it pushed music.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, without Pet Sounds, you wouldn't get Sgt. Pepper, It just
exactly
it wouldn't be the same. Yeah. It wouldn't have been the same at all.
Kind of like how you had Pink Floyd on one hand and the other bands on the other, whichever one you want to put there, was ELO or whatever.
Yeah, they were all pushing each other, yeah.
Yeah, and, like in the 70s and then the 80s, of course, you had Michael pushing Prince, and it's vice versa. And it's that helps music.
As listeners, it's good for us. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that stuff really works for us to give.
You would think that the Stones were their competition. Oh no, fuck, that wasn't their competition. Was the Beach Boys, because they're the guys that are doing the stuff we're not. What do we got to do to make it sound like that? Plus, make it better. And that's
we could do an entire show about the Beatles and the Stones and their rivalry, stroke friendship, stroke whatever.
Beatles even gave them a couple songs.
Well, the very first the first Rolling Stones hit in the UK was "I Want to Be Your Man," which the Beatles wrote in
That's
10 minutes.
Sure. Yep.
They gave it to the Stones, and John and Paul went off in the corner, wrote it, gave it to them. They tweeted it as a single, bang, they had a minor hit. And the Stones refused to acknowledge it for decades afterwards till they finally played it on that anniversary gig that they had Mick Taylor and others, and Bill Wyman. But they finally played it live. But and then of course John famously wrote "And Your Bird Can Sing," and that's about Mick Jagger, and Marianne Faithfull. So that's Anyway, I could talk about that all day.
Yeah, I know, right?
and not to, I mean, don't get me wrong, I adore the Stones, and I've seen them live a few times, and but the John particularly always had you guys are just the followers, you're just followed on from us.
Well, they kind of were in a way. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, they clearly did their own kind of sound and had their own inspiration on music, but
Oh yeah, but they were certainly, in terms of breaking, the Beatles broke the ground.
Yes.
That these guys all were able to just rush through the door afterwards.
And then Who kind of picked up the baton, and then Led Zeppelin and Floyd and so on. Fleetwood Mac, of course, was in the middle of all that stuff.
I mean, absolutely, and Wookie is fantastic. I chat to him all the time. He's great, and thank you for being here, Wookie, and listening and watching my stuff and listening. It's I get it. Not everyone likes the Beatles, and especially nowadays when you look back, a lot of people I know are saying, "Well, that sounds really primitive," or "It doesn't sound great." And a lot of their stuff on the earlier albums is a bit, hokey. There's some filler in there.
I can totally understand.
Yeah, right. But it's the impact that they had. I mean, you got a period of time where rock and roll was dying, and it was the crooners were coming back, and they were. Elvis was in the army. Buddy Holly was dead. Little Richard was getting God. Jerry Lee was he was getting done for sleeping with his cousin or marrying his cousin. It was all kind of falling apart, and the revolution was
kind of taking over again.
Yeah, and the record companies had got a grip of the rebels. Gene Vincent was died and whatever. And then the guys that followed them, like the Beatles, came on and they went, no, we're still into rock and roll. Bang. And that's what started the 60s explosion then. And, so for that alone, I'm grateful to the Beatles, for everything else that came after. It's
they definitely opened the door and influenced so many. Like, I mean, Christ, every band from pretty much the 70s up through the 90s, like they all said, we want to be the Beatles.
Indeed, and somebody, I think Sentient Dildo there mentions Pink Floyd. Well, Pink Floyd were in Studio 1 in Abbey Road when the Beatles were in Studio 2. Pink Floyd were recording their first album, and the Beatles were over in Studio 2, and they went in and they were so thrilled to be able to go in and sit and watch the Beatles recording what must have been some of the Magical Mystery Tour stuff, maybe, or
like to what the Beatles were to the 60s. I'd argue that the Floyd were to the 70s.
Oh, you could make that argument. I mean, they progressed. They literally called it progressive rock for a reason, and they progressed the sounds available and the scope and the majesty of rock. Almost, Pink Floyd are just beautiful, beautiful albums.
Well, and massive in their scale. Draw parallels to things like like Dark Side of the Moon to Sgt. Pepper, and of course, the White Album to The Wall, for instance, and certain things like that.
They're equally impactful. Yeah, absolutely. And Dark Side of the Moon had a lot of that electronic stuff on it, and that Roger Waters liked to play about with, and just the beauty of their songwriting too, and their fearlessness in that scope. They wanted to make something that was lasting. Yeah,
they solidified the album rock era for sure.
Yeah, like that. Funnily enough, one of the things George Harrison was doing between around about the end of the White Album and the start of this was he was making some electronic music. He did that album called Electronic Music. He was one of the first guys to get a Moog
synthesizer. I don't know if I've ever heard that.
And he made a whole album called Electronic Music and put it out on Apple of basically Moog stuff. But he also played a Moog on Abbey Road. So there's various points in where you'll hear a kind of whooshing noise, or you hear a bit of this and a bit of that. It's George playing a Moog.
And well, he was always kind of ahead of that stuff. Like, that's what I loved in this documentary, is when they don't have the proper equipment, they bring in George's 8-track or whatever it is.
I'll get me from the house, like, the Magic Alex. My own night. But Magic Alex, who was meant to build in that studio, what a freaking Alex Madras. What a con man. What he did apparently was, apart from the fact he built a bunch of shit with oscilloscopes, was that he had 22 speakers.
Yes.
One for every track.
Oh, Lord, was it a mess?
Not realizing you control that with the faders and you mix it in so you can hear everything.
What I do hope this comes out, like, I mean, of course I can just watch it anytime, but the beauty of this is because I went back and I started watching the anthology again, and it's such a good companion to this, right? Because the anthology, the box set that's out there, does such a beautiful job of encapsulating and giving you a good overview of the Beatles' career in sound and picture. And you get like the lead up to this, you get some of the highlights, but the lead up is what you're talking about there. And yeah, Magic, what's his name again? Fucking
Magic Alex.
Yeah. Magic Alex. I was gonna say Magic Mike. Magic Alex, like,
might as well be.
They show him setting up this shit in the Beatles anthology, and you're just like,
you're like, oh,
this guy is fucking insane.
George was a better electrician than him.
And so you finally get to see the result of that, which you don't really get to see so much in the anthology, and that is that everything he did was unusable. Like, whatever he set up did nothing but make noise on everything. They couldn't record nothing. That was one of the few times I think George was like the most active in the whole thing. He's like, we just can't work like this. He's just
well, George was actually really into the technical side of it because he'd been an electrician before the Beatles became a big thing. Before he got before they really took off as a career. So he'd spent a little time as an apprentice electrician. So he actually was the guy that in Hamburg used to fix all their amps up and fix the gear up, which is probably why he got the recording stuff as well. He was into that side of it a little bit. So more so than John, who just...
Well, the production value shows later on as far as like... Because, we just talked about All Things Must Pass. I mean, that album was recorded, 2 years after this? Not even?
Oh, not even, hardly, I guess.
And it sounds like, you hear a song like, What Is Life? Tell me that doesn't sound like a song that was produced in the fucking 80s or 90s.
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful production. It's very dense production as well.
Exactly. And you listen to the demo of that in comparison, which is on that beautiful box that I was just talking about. It's just like, my God, you're right. Like, this guy knew, I never really gave him enough. Like, I haven't checked out a lot of his solo shit. And I feel kind of bad about it.
Well, I've got virtually every solo thing that George did, vinyl and whatever. And it really, when it got later and when he hooked up with Jeff Lynne, he really got back into it.
Right.
So Cloud Nine is a great album. And the last one the last album he made before he died, God, my mind's just going to blank.
I know the one you're talking about, but yeah.
It's beautiful. So
yeah, see, that's the thing is I kind of picked and choosed with him. He was the kind of the guy that, like with Ringo, I just grabbed the greatest hits usually.
Yeah, there was a period where he made what were some really laid back albums and Gone Triple
like
and
we
stuff
said
like
earlier
that.
too. He also just kind of got cold scared after the whole fucking court thing for a couple of years. He just didn't. He's like, I can't remember the exact quote, but he's like, I was afraid of using other people's notes or something like that.
Yeah. Well, he made a whole song and video about it. This song,
yeah,
which has got a courtroom video in there. Yeah, this song is not infringing on anyone or whatever the lyric is. Yeah, the poor guy.
$9 or whatever.
Yeah. It's quite a good video if you watch it. He satirizes it.
Yeah.
And because he was big pals with Eric Idle and the Python guys, so
yeah.
He appeared on Eric Idle's show Rutland Weekend Television, and he's in the Ruttles, and he actually had a wicked sense of humor, George, that he never gave away because in interviews he was always so.
I mean, I feel bad because I knew about his Python connection. I know to thank him for
handmade films.
Handmade films and all that business, but I guess musically I always kind of gave him the shaft, or not the shaft so much, but Yeah, I just never respected him as much as I probably should have. After watching this, I got a newfound respect for him.
His material is a little less accessible in the sense that it's not as rock and roll. It's quite laid back.
To be honest, I was
Particularly,
always kind of a Paul guy.
well, I was a huge Paul and Wings fan.
Yeah.
Early 70s, and I've got all these Wings box
No, I
sets
mean,
here and
I always
McCartney
used to
box
be
sets.
like, yeah, like John was the guy who wrote the songs that was impactful. Like if you wanted to write a song that was going to say something with a message, John was your guy. He was the lyric guy. Paul was the guy who's just good at writing good tunes, right? Like just good, clearly going to be a fucking hit pop tunes.
Well, we mentioned earlier Backseat of My Car and Ram. That's one of my favorite Paul songs. You've got Maybe I'm Amazed, which just imagine if the Beatles hadn't broken up.
That would have been, I mean,
you could have had a set with Maybe I'm Amazed, All Things Must Pass, Cold Turkey. They could all have been in the live set, you know. It's just,
yeah, and it would have fit. It would have totally fit.
Yeah, but yeah, and Paul, like anything else, you throw enough mud at the wall, some of it's going to turn to shit. And there's everyone knows the crappy Paul stuff, but there's a fucking great ton of good stuff there. And particularly in the 70s when he was playing the Fender bass live, like if you see Wings Over America, he's absolutely rocking that bass.
Oh yeah, yeah,
unbelievably well. He was a peak of his powers there as a bass player. But yeah, I mean, I could go through his career and say, well, I like that one, not so keen on that one. Like if you don't like Paul McCartney, but you like rock and roll, listen to Run Devil Run album. That album it's rock and roll covers. It's just phenomenal. But
see, now John's one of those that I actually prefer some of his raw shit. Like,
oh yeah,
his overproduced. Like to me, some of his songs are more overproduced than they should be.
It's syrupy, like Mind Games era. Things got a little bit syrupy, but when he did Cold Turkey, for instance, that's brilliant. It's just
like
raw.
For instance, like Wheels is a song I love, just fucking adore his acoustic version as compared to the studio version.
Yeah. That's on Once Upon a Time, I think, isn't
it? Yeah, the big box set. Yeah, but it was also used in a couple movies, actually, believe it or not, that version. Yeah. And same thing with, I love his version of Real Love as well. Even though I do love the Beatles version, in quotations, his version just, him and his audio tapes, just listening to him doing his regular thing, to me, like so much more impactful than a lot of his recorded versions. The recorded versions they're good, but that box set you're talking about, I can't remember if it has the same name over here. I think it's something about New York over here that the New York Years or something like that it's called. I can't remember.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
But yeah, there's some great stuff on there that John never, I mean, to me, like a lot of his demos and stuff that was, Imagine's probably the closest thing to his that got to being like, from sounding like it sounded when he first wrote it to the end stage.
Yeah, and he still wasn't. He still had a fairly stripped down sound then. He wasn't. Exactly. He wasn't layering strings and stuff on it. And I loved it. I mean, who knows what we would have got, but Double Fantasy. At least half of the album's good. But yeah, when you got he was working with like Cheap Trick in that version of I'm Losing You with Cheap Trick on it. It's just fucking awesome, I mean, it shows what he could have done given that his life wouldn't be taken away from him like that. You know?
That was just...
he would go, who knows?
Agree or not with his politics. I mean, that's what pisses me off about the song Imagine was fucking adopted by those idiots.
Yeah. And John himself was a bit of a vacillator around that stuff. He was like, I hang out with revolutionaries, but maybe I'm just...
Well, that's the difference between the two. And that's what was so great is, that's why they think they work so great together, right? Is like I just said, Paul had that ear for a good tune, right? The words didn't fucking matter. They were secondary to him. The tune was more important. With John, it was about the words. But he was also one that, once they clicked. He was like, they'll come to you. They'll come to you. Just let them
yin
come.
and the yang, I mean, they need, in a sense, if those two guys had been exactly the same, you would never have got what you got. You get two guys that are the same, you're just going to get the same. Those guys were, and yet they were close. So you'd see them working face to face there.
And that's where you bring in George and it's magic. And I mean, we've been ignoring Ringo, but I mean...
Well, I was going to get to Ringo in a minute, and the funny thing I found about these sessions was that Ringo is extremely quiet. He doesn't say much.
He knows his role, but you know what? When he says something, They all fucking listen.
Yeah, and he's. I mean, he was used to this from a lot of sessions in the days where they were like Sergeant Pepper. He would sit there for hours doing nothing. So he's kind of used to it. But the minute they ask him to do something, bang, he's right there, which is a skill in itself, because you could just say, you know what, I'm absolutely bored shitless here. I can't give a. I'm not going to play like shit. He didn't. He was bang right on.
Well, he's like a machine, and I think it was Paul who said it once. Like, the thing about Ringo was he wasn't a flashy drummer, but what he was is he was, of all the drummers they played with, he was the one who kept time like nobody's business.
Oh yeah, well, that's right. Well, when he left the band briefly during White Album sessions, like George did in this, and I think the other three ended up playing drums on at least two tracks. One is back in the USSR.
Paul would usually jump on drums.
Paul's so Paul's everyone's favorite singing drummer. But John once was asked about Ringo, and someone said to him, "You'll know this quote." He said, "Is Ringo the best drummer in the world?" He says, "Hell, he's not even the best drummer in the Beatles, but he's the best." Yeah. He's the best drummer for the Beatles.
Yes.
He's not even the best in the Beatles.
But he doesn't get a lot of credit for some of the shit he does, too. But I mean, you can hear like some of the shitty ads in here and there, but like you can clearly see why, because you got Paul basically conducting him. Like he's telling him, do it like this and then do the da-dun, 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 to this part. And, so he, like you said, he's just kind of listening along. But the beauty of it is like when he says, I want to do something, they do it. Like, because they're all like, oh, should we play on the roof? I don't want to play on the roof. It's just going to be fucking cold. I don't want to do that. All the other three are like that. And then all of a sudden you hear Ringo, oh, I'd like to do it.
That's right. I'd like to do it. I'm interested. The other thing about Ringo, though, is in Get Back, is I felt that half the time he looked like he was stoned.
Oh, they all were. They clearly all
But he's lying there with his head on people falling asleep.
Even more so after lunch. It's obvious as fuck.
I mean, they're drinking all day as well.
Yeah, on top of the drinking. But
his eyes are like this, pinholes.
I don't know how many times you can tell John is probably shooting up something. But
he said he tended more to snort something than shoot it up. But yeah, it's the same thing.
But he comes in the one night where right after he talks about it and stuff like that. And that was, the first time I think he tried it was that one night.
But he's Ringo was pretty out of it sometimes. But as I say, when he was called on like a metronome, and then he said, "I want to do this. I want to play live again. I want to do something." He was a performer.
He was the only one who wanted to, but they did it.
You know what? I don't know what you think. I mean, hopefully you'll have an opinion on this, but Michael Lindsay Hogg was pushing that idea constantly of let's go to this amphitheater and show the pictures of it. I would have fucking loved that.
It would have been
cool, epic.
But I think if they'd have done something like I think the time wasn't right for it. I think Pink Floyd proved that when they did kind of their thing a little later on. Yeah. And because like them, it worked for them. For the Beatles, I think they made the better point. I can't remember who brought it up initially, but George like pointed out how stupid of an idea it was. It's like, how are we going to get anybody over there unless we bring a boat? He's like, you're going to fucking get a boat? He's like, we can't even get them to give us an amp. How are you going to get them to fucking pay for that?
Well, I think George recognized their lack of organizational ability, I think.
Yeah. And no, Lindsay, I understand where Hogg was coming from because he needed some. You look at this footage and us now in retrospect, this is amazing to have, but you got to remember at the time, this guy first was starting with a TV special. And then they're like, okay, no, we're not going to do a movie. And he needed a climax. Otherwise, like he said it time and time again, without some kind of climax, this is nothing. It's just you guys fucking around basically. And like,
that's right.
Nothing to work with at that time. I mean, you got to imagine it from his perspective. I digress. We have the hindsight and all that kind of business and loving getting to see this as, fans for our whole lives. But at that time, the Beatles were in the midst of their, this would be like, just think about like.
It's just a storm around them, yeah.
Like if at that time, instead of deciding to do the Avengers, they would have went a completely different direction, right? Like, I mean, that's kind of where we're at here is like, they can't just make a decision. And that was the beauty of this is just, like we were saying earlier, is just getting to see how it's like, even though these guys are going back to even what Wookiee supremacy or said it, about the whole them being overrated. Well, the fact that they were able to be this influential and not that organized is fucking amazing.
It's incredible, isn't it? Really? Yeah. I mean, they never had a chance to be organized. They were just kids when they started the band, and they never had real jobs. And they were like, "What the fuck? We'll just play music,"
And then you go and you see, like, 10 years later, how meticulous, like, Roger Waters and stuff like that is with that shit. Comparatively, it's like, wow,
those guys were project managers as well as musicians. Yeah. Another Gen 42 there. I have some Apocalyptica. I've got the Metallica stuff they did. It's really good.
Oh yeah,
all on cellos. Yeah, it's great.
I remember that.
Yeah, it's good stuff that. But Ringo was a good lad. I mean, he's and you could see him writing.
Well, the other reason I think he was quiet, mostly probably during this, is not so much that was normal for him, as it was he knew that he was the reason they were pressured to be pushed this quickly to get this done. So I'm sure he was just trying to be a good boy and not piss
it's my fault.
off.
I'm in this movie. Yeah.
Well, they knew. Well, he was the reason they had to rush.
Magic Christian.
Yeah, because they had to get that they had to be done by a certain date because they were going to lose Ringo.
With that great music from Badfinger in it, one of my favorite bands, and the music for the Magic Christian was done by Badfinger.
Badfinger rocks, yeah.
Yeah, great band. But funnily enough, Ringo was always the calming influence. And when George went away for a few days there, John, Paul, and Ringo were fine. They did stuff. And then if John was out of the way, Paul, George, and Ringo did stuff, and they were fine. It's when all four of them were there, it started to get fractious sometimes. But it's funny, they could work in these little threesomes. But like after John had quit at Abbey Road era, Paul and George and Ringo finished some stuff up. Like John's not on something; he doesn't play on that record. But the other three worked fine together. And then when George wasn't there, the other three worked fine together. And it was always the four of them that started to have a problem.
Right.
But yeah, it's we got what we got as fans, and I'm very grateful for it. But so I'd like just a little bit wanted to talk about the filming of the Rooftop concert. I actually liked what they did with the cameras down on the street. I've always liked that, and talking to people in the street.
Yeah, that was kind of neat.
I thought that was really good, and it got to see a variety of Londoners, not all of them swinging. It wasn't all swinging London. There's a lot of pinstripes and bowler hats, and
the beauty of it is anybody who's a historian knows, like generally when you're studying history or diving into any subject, I can't remember the actual term for it. I wish I could, because now I'm going to sound so stupid, but history is always told from those who, have a certain perspective on it. We don't generally get to hear what the normal average Joe thought about something, right? We always get it from the perspective of the critics and, the recollection of those involved generally, stuff like that, right? Like, we don't generally get to hear what the average Joe felt about something at the time in real time. Very rarely. Like once in a great while, they have interviews with fans here and there, but like this was something that you got to hear, not just fans particularly, but like you said, like just average Joes on the street. You got a varied reaction. You got some people like, it fucking sucks. I wish they weren't doing this. They're ruining my business. Like, I don't like it. It's fucking noise. It's racket. And then you had other people like, yeah, they're pretty good guys. Yeah, it's pretty good music. I don't know. Who are they? Like,
that's right. Who is that? Yeah, and then they were asking some people, and they went, I think it's the Beatles. It sounds like the Beatles.
And then slowly you had, of course, the congregating crowd of fans, but yeah.
Yeah. You notice the apple scruffs, the girls that were always hanging out.
Yeah, the ones that were always hanging out, yeah.
Yeah, they called them the apple scruffs. They were there at Twickenham. They were there. That was their life. They hung outside. They hung outside St. John's Wood, Paul's place, and they couldn't hang outside John and George's because they were in the country, so it's harder to get to. But yeah, they were there. But they asked, I loved it when they'd ask, you'd get sometimes you think this guy's an older looking guy, he's going to say this is terrible. He goes, no, I think it's great. I love the Beatles. They're very fantastic, And then they'd ask some younger guy, and he's like, oh, no, I can't stand the Beatles and I hate this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, it was neat. And then when the police arrived,
the Karens that were all upset about their businesses being
destroyed. Oh yeah, well, it was principally the business directly opposite that complained, apparently.
And that was because they had somebody had from a news place had crawled up there on their roof or some shit. So like I can't remember who it was. It was either Hogg or somebody else who was trying to explain like we have no fucking control over that. Like
that's right. Yeah. Excuse me.
Sorry, I should have asked about the swearing ahead of time, but yeah.
No, fuck, I don't care.
I figured as much.
I don't think my grandchildren are watching, so we're okay. But the police that arrived, the two police guys. First of all, the first one, apparently he was only like 20 or 21. And I still don't know why they can't put their chin strap under their chin, but that's another story.
Is that like the way they're supposed to wear them or what?
I guess so. I mean, I seem to remember police constables in those days having those hats, and I guess they never put them under their chin. So why they didn't fall off all the time, I don't know. But anyway, he was a young guy, and you could see him coming on all heavy there. Like, you got to shut this down. I'm going to arrest you all, and I'm going to. Apparently, that guy's still alive, and he said, "Oh, I was just bluffing. How could I arrest them then?"
Well, what's funny is in contrast is what is it, the constable or whatever you call it, like the head of the cops comes down.
The sergeant arrives eventually.
Yeah.
And he's all
nice. And he's all like, "Yes, do you mind if I go up on the roof?" And it's like, like what kind of cop is this?
But I mean, this young guy is busy saying to
the cops are like in the U.S. Man, shit, that cop be like, "Open the fucking door."
That's right.
I'm going to the roof.
In Britain, they would just beat you with their truncheon.
Get in my way and see what happens.
But he says to I was getting quite annoyed. He says to the receptionist, "I'm going to arrest you if you don't stop this." Well, she's the receptionist. What's she going to do? You know, give her a break. You know, but they were getting the piss taken out of them because, and obviously Derek Taylor was the marketing guy, communications guy, was organising this. He said, "Just keep stalling them." Yeah. "Oh, well, we can't go through there and we can't go up there and we don't know who's doing it and they're making a record," and they stalled them. No wonder the guy was getting angry. But
they played it perfectly. It's amazing.
They did, and of course the Beatles themselves later said, "Oh, we wish we'd got arrested. That would have been a great way to end it."
It definitely would have helped their image for sure.
Yeah, so it was a magic watching it again. That rooftop thing, it was magic. You know, I mean,
well, it's beautiful to get to see it in its entirety because I mean, I've seen God of all the Beatles stuff. Like that's probably one of the most overseen things is the clips from the Rooftop show, but we've never got to see it all in its entirety without it because that's the one piece where I believe Peter gave it to us in complete real time with no editing outside of just from various camera angles.
I think so. Yeah,
all in 100% real time.
Yeah, and it was awesome. You saw them again as the rock and roll band they were back in Hamburg, which is in the background now, albeit there's Pete Best and Stu Sutcliffe there too. But you saw them as just a rock and roll band, and with Billy Preston, who was great in this and added that fantastic electric piano and everything and calmed them all down. He was brilliant. But you saw them just four guys playing. Paul's on the bass.
Very poignant, yeah.
And the vocalizing was great. There was one of their main strengths was always the vocal harmonies. You could hear the two, John and Paul's voices working off each other, and they sounded so good, you know.
Well, that was the beauty of it, even when they were just constructing the songs, right? Was just how well they worked together in that respect. All three of them, really, in how they would, you know, even though we would hear later on stuff that would, while we were listening to them constructed, that would clearly go to the wayside. Just them trying different things and how they would throw it in there, but just how in unison they would be is like, because they would go from having a little fucking tiff, and I wouldn't even call it a fight because they had just these little spats and these little back and forths and whatever, and then they break right into song, and it was like nothing happened, right? It was just like, you know, like they were just riding a bike all of a sudden. It was just, it was so awesome to see.
Back in that groove, and you could almost shut your eyes when they're doing One After 909 and think this is what they sounded like in the Cavern or in Hamburg before they got screamed to death, you know.
And the beauty, of course, of the audio bit that, you know, like, because most of this was recorded in mono with mics all over the fucking place. So what Peter was able to do with that and it sounds amazing because to be able to hear it all and it sounds like you're there. And again, like, I'm very, like, even though the picture thing, I can be a little bit of a curmudgeon about that, but I can't think of enough applications for this sound thing that he figured out for this. It's just amazing.
Oh yeah, I mean it's genius what they can do. What a guy like Peter Jackson can do with audio, and I'm looking forward to listening to this, watching that again on headphones, because I watched it just on my normal sound system. I want to have headphones on, and I want to listen to the audio material with the headphones on. But mono was still their big thing then. I mean, the Beatles didn't release a single principally in stereo until 1969 itself. You know, they still released everything
stereo was kind of a fairly new thing at that point.
Mono first was still their motto.
I mean, not new, but it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't like the norm. And even like, and that's of course one of the huge debates go, about how the Beatles music is listened to, and that's one of the reasons why I kind of gravitate towards Giles remixes, is because to my ears he does the best job of balancing out their music in a great soundscape, because I prefer stereo over mono. And
me too. I do have the Beatles in mono there and a lot of mono vinyl, but I like that separation. I like the way you can play with the mix to put things in the middle of your head.
Well, and that's the beauty of it is that Giles has so much more at his fingertips to work with than his dad did. At that time, a lot of the times, especially the early stuff, you were
two
stuck
tracks.
With, you were stuck with 2 tracks, and then you had to hard right or hard left things. So you were wound up with like all the instruments in one ear usually, and the audio and the drums in the other ear. And that usually was just sounding like junk. And I can understand why most people gravitate towards the mono mix. But now if you listen to Giles Martin's mixes, I feel like he does the best to emulate what people like about the mono mix, along with giving it a full stereo sound, and every piece is still heard well, and it's not muddy, it's not buried.
And at the end of the day, it's the clarity that counts, regardless of the format, whether it be stereo or...
Because there's licks and stuff that I have never heard in the White Album and Let It Be and Abbey Road specifically. Now, Sgt. Pepper had limitations that he could work with, because that was only done on 4-track with 1 track bounced down. So he was kind of limited on what he could work with.
Once things got bounced down, it's harder to reverse that.
But now the beauty of that is, with this technology that Peter has come up with, you could theoretically go back and reconstruct it. Now, should they do that? No. I think Giles did a great job as it is. It's fine. Leave it alone.
I think so, yeah. I think there's a point where it becomes a futile exercise. We love the songs for what they are. There's some great versions.
Start messing with it too much, then yeah.
Yeah, there's some great audio. I mean, I loved what they did on Love. They did some great mixes on that.
Yes.
And I've saw it live in Vegas twice. It sent shivers down my spine. The opening of Get Back, the first time I saw it, in fact, I think I had a tear in my eye. But the sound in that is just phenomenal. What they did with those songs, I'd never heard them like that before.
Yeah, I think Giles did those.
Giles was heavily involved in that as well. Yeah, I think George might have been too, but really, it was Giles.
That's one of those fun albums I love to listen to as an also-ran as well. I never got to see the show, but luckily I got my hands on the album, and I got that double disc that's harder to find now that actually has the 5.1 mix on it. And
it's great.
It's awesome. It's awesome to listen to.
Yeah, it really brought life to those songs, and mixing them together like that, there were some great cuts. Just some of them blended so well together. You think, oh my God.
And some you wouldn't even imagine, but yeah.
Yeah.
Unintended, even though that's not a Beatles song.
Well, could have been.
Could have been.
Yeah, they're great. It's great stuff. I mean, I could talk about that all day. But one of the other, and we'll unfortunately probably have to wrap up shortly, my friend. But one of the other things,
I got a show to get to here soon too.
Yeah, you got other stuff to do, and but one of the sad things was seeing all the people who are no longer with us, of course, in Get Back. You got John and George, principally, of course, Linda McCartney, Maureen Starkey, George Martin, Derek Taylor, Neil Aspinall, and Mal Evans. They're all gone now. It's sad, that time has caught up with them, but Glenn Johns was still around, and I think he was at the premiere.
And I guess that's one of the other things that people have kind of discussed with this documentary, if you can call it that, because it really, it is, but it's
not really a documentary, is it? Though, it's like a film of a documentary.
It's kind of weird because, like, you don't get any of the talking head business. You don't, where I mean, like, you don't have any retrospective interviews to go into this. The only modern things you're given is some slight context here and there.
Yeah. You get the odd textual,
yeah,
layered on to say,
and it's
today,
never to influence anything. Yeah, it's just to let you know what happened or what they're talking about or discussing. Right? Exactly.
Yeah, there's no narrative given to you other than what's in the film itself. It's almost like a film. I don't know, verite. Like a film.
I mean, it is a documentary.
French film verite.
It is a documentary in the purest sense of the term. Let's be real,
because it documents what happened. Yeah, there's no narrative. It's not anyone's opinion layered on it. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's one thing people noticed and pointed out, and I'm kind of glad they didn't in retrospect, because I mean, the Beatles anthology is great on its own as its thing, but I feel like if they would have done that, it would have been feeling like the Beatles anthology part 2.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like I love to see it in its rawest form. He could give it to us in its most watchability, because to sit there and sift through all those tapes. Because he even said in one of the interviews, I mean, clearly there's stuff that's on the cutting room floor that he still wanted to get in but didn't, as you brought up earlier. But he did still leave things in there. He's like, they weren't necessarily important, but as a Beatles fan, I thought they were fucking neat, so I left them in.
And it did keep growing.
Yeah, exactly.
And Paul and Ringo said, "Yeah, let it grow." And Disney said, "Oh, okay, make it 8 hours then." And he kept pushing it. It got bigger and bigger.
Yeah, once he knew it wasn't going to theaters, he knew that was his opportunity. Yeah. And I'm glad he stuck to his guns. And again, I mean, my one minor nitpick aside, I mean, that is a minor nitpick. He does not get I mean, he's never going to be able to get enough praise heaped upon him for what he accomplished here with this. In Beatles history, this is one of those stones that has been not so much unturned, but never quite seen from this angle.
It's not been, you're right, mate. Yeah. And, Let It Be itself has been out of circulation for so long as a movie, and hard to see. It's not that easy to see.
I guess that's the question, because I've only seen it once years and years and years and years ago on a bad bootleg.
Yeah, I got a VHS copy of it.
Do you know it well enough to compare it to this now? Do you think
I do. This is by far and away a superior experience.
Is there anything in that's not in this?
No. That's not that I'm aware of. Yeah. And it's the way it's edited and cut. It really is a miserable experience, Let It Be, as a movie.
Yeah, I know. I remember it not being very fun to watch.
Paul said it's a movie about a band breaking up, whereas this shows the other side of it completely. A working band, a great rock and roll band, 4 guys that are tight and still friends despite the arguments. And everybody argues. You argue with your wife, you argue with your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever.
Your friends, whatever, yeah.
Yeah. But they were still tight. They could still play. They still loved music. The Beatles were still a thing, So Let It Be was a miserable experience as a movie. This is way superior.
Yeah, the reason I asked is because I couldn't remember if there was anything in that necessarily that didn't make its way into this, because if there was, I would still say, then let's just forget about that and this be the definitive version of it.
I think there may be some different camera angles. I seem to recall the bit where John and Yoko are waltzing. There's a different camera angle, but I think the material's the same.
I'm talking about material-wise, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think... I mean, it's been 15 years since I've seen it, but I don't recall anything.
I'm sure there'll eventually be some YouTube videos to compare, but...
Oh, absolutely, and they'll get struck down.
There was a decent version that... Well, I just meant even commentary on it, but there was a decent version that made its way, I believe, on Vimeo. I don't know if it's still up, but...
I'm not entirely sure, mate. I'll have to have a look, yeah, but there's never been a proper high-definition release of it.
No, I don't think it was HD, but it was definitely in widescreen at least, and it was higher quality standard def, I think.
Yeah, there was a Laserdisc version, which might have been widescreen at some point, but...
this even looked better than that, so I don't know if this was for... Because it was supposed to come out at one point, and they stopped it. Paul did. I'm trying to think. It
would be interesting to see if that opinion of Paul's has changed now that this... more positive views out, whether he'd be happy to let the other things slip out. But
I wouldn't be surprised if they tossed, let's say, for instance, they do an Uber box set of this to bring it out on Blu-ray. I wouldn't be surprised if they threw it in as a special feature. But yeah, my thinking is, being as popular as the Beatles are, that DVD made it pretty far into the process before Paul stopped it. And that was the version that leaked out on Vimeo.
Okay, it could be. Yeah. It's
It's
right to
a
say.
very, very good version of it, actually. I mean,
I'll
I
have to
didn't
have a
watch
look.
in its entirety, but I watched a few minutes of them. Like, yeah, and I
I mean, it's
tucked it
always
away.
worth watching, but it is a
And
much
I
more
should have it on a drive somewhere.
Yeah, that's the best way to get it. But D. Bud Martin, that's my favourite Badfinger song, Day After Day. So that's why I highlighted that. Yes, my friend. So is there? I really appreciate you joining me, and I
No
appreciate
problem,
you
man. This
coming
has been a
back after
pleasure.
we got. No, it's
I
been a
wish we had more
pleasure to
time.
talk to you about this, and we should do it again sometime.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I said, I wish we had more time to discuss it because
Well, we'll
I only
talk
got to watch it
offline.
once.
Well, we could talk offline. Maybe we'll set up a second one, and this one I'll do with some stills, and we won't maybe get struck. But what would you like to promote, my friend?
Other than safe sex, just toxic femininity tonight. I
All
got to head
right,
over
cool,
there here in a little bit. Actually, got to get that ready. So we'll
cool.
definitely have to set something up for the future. But yeah, I got to get to
Yeah,
work on
let's
toxic fem.
connect offline, and we'll maybe do a round two.
Sounds
And
good.
yeah, I'd love it, mate. And as I say, really thank you for joining me. I'm a novice live streamer, so I do appreciate your support.
Oh, this has been a great conversation, and you're just as much more knowledgeable, actually, should say,
I'm
than I
just a
am of the
fan.
Beatles. But yeah,
I'm just a fan. I've never presented myself as an expert. I'd forgotten so many things, but I'm a fan and I like to talk about them.
well,
So
they were a band I discovered. I mean, I always knew of them, but like, I really, really got into them. Like, it was weird because I just started getting into them, and the Beatles anthology dropped like a year or two after I started getting into them. So it was like all perfectly timed, perfect storm for me to get into the Beatles.
that's
Um,
cool.
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because they all re-released everything right around that time, so it was just all perfect timing for me to get into it. And yeah, and since then I've been an avid fan. I mean, between them and Pink Floyd are probably my favorite bands of all time, and
cool.
so
You
like,
can do a lot worse.
oh yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah, you know what? I'll just hang on a sec.
definitely,
I'll
but
promote
probably the
that.
Beatles have always,
There we
I
go.
mean, more so, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as I've said in other streams, they're like an integral part of my life. Being born in '63, you know, as a little kid, even before I remember hearing them, I would have been hearing them. But one of my earliest memories is, you know, my mother had a radio, a little transistor radio on in the kitchen, and I remember hearing Penny Lane, and I must have been about 4 years old, and that's always stuck in my head. Going, what is that? And you know, and my mother and the kitchen are still there. The transistor is gone now, though. So, but yeah,
well, at least
that's
your mother's, yeah,
she's still there,
well, yeah,
just. But yeah, so they've always been an integral part of my life. It's one of these weird things. It's like,
yeah.
you know, like Doctor Who as well, and things like that. They've always been there.
I
It's
mean, yeah,
weird.
I mean, growing up, the songs were just kind of always on the oldies station.
Yeah.
Help was one of the few songs that stuck out to me because, believe it or not, the Batman 60s TV show on my local Fox station would show every Sunday. They'd show an hour block.
Mm.
So during the kids' shows during the week, they would advertise. They would advertise Batman, and since they were a little local station, they got away with using the Beatles song "Help."
Yeah,
So
it's
I always
pretty cool.
associated that song with Batman 66 because it was just a montage of
Mm.
Batman and Robin stuck in those, ridiculous,
It's quite interesting,
you
isn't
know
it,
what I
when you
mean?
think
Like
about it?
it'd be really great to find. I doubt anybody's had a tape of it and put it on YouTube, but yeah, just out of memory, I could probably re-edit a
Oh,
version of it.
that
But
would be awesome. Because if you think about it, they're both 60s icons.
yeah,
You
well, that
know?
was the beauty of it. They just edited it to like all the scenes of Batman and Robin being put in the bad,
Yeah.
contraptions and shit like that. Like, are they gonna get out? Kind
Well,
of shit.
what would Bat Tom think of that?
Of the song or just
Yeah,
the contraptions?
What would Bat Tom think of help being used to?
It's pretty badass.
Couldn't resist it, mate. I had to get you to do it.
But no, like my actual like foray into the Beatles, believe it or not, was a buddy of mine got me stoned and we listened to Sergeant Pepper's. So that was kind of like my real
Excellent. Yeah, and
first
then you
kind of like,
realized you'd heard it backwards by
I heard
mistake.
it and totally like, I mean, I knew some of the songs, but it was just like, I never actually
Yeah.
listened to a Beatles album before,
Oh,
really.
that's a good one to sit and just listen to, especially if it's
Exactly, yeah.
loud. Yeah. Cool. No, that's great to hear, mate. And yeah, anyway, everybody in the chat, if you're not doing anything after this, head over to Toxic Femininity.
Yeah,
and
I gotta
also,
get my gear.
Obviously, Midnight's Edge After Dark, and my favorite MEAD Radio. Everyone should check those out. And from myself's point of view, tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. Pacific, I'm having a 200 subscriber celebration with my good friends Darius and yeah, thank you, sir. And yeah, so anyone wants to drop on by and take part in that and hear more of my inane mumblings, that'd be great.
I might be able to hop in.
Yeah, I'll send you the link, mate. Yeah, for sure, and appreciate that. And yeah, drop on by, and thank you everyone in the chat for sticking with us, especially when we had to change streams.
Yeah,
which I was like, oh my god, what am I going to do? But you got to face these things at some point. And yeah, thanks for all joining in and your great chats, and I will see you all again very soon.
Take care, kids.
Goodbye.